Okay, so thank you very much for that warm introduction. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. I went to get to Temple together with a lot of the new chairs, so that was fun to see everybody. I guess I will share my screen and start the presentation. So let me just share this, and here we go. Okay, so the title of my presentation today is Mall Applications and Games, Tools that can be used in Japanese EFL classrooms, and presented by me and Yukiko Yoshihara. And I'll just get right into it. So first of all, what is mall? So most people probably know what it is already, but it's basically call plus the mobile aspect. So it's mobile assisted language learning. And essentially it's using smartphones, laptops, tablets, any kind of technology that you can use in order to help you learn a language. And so I was interested in this topic because I'm also interested in autonomous learning. And let me move this somewhere. Maybe I'll move it down here. Okay, I don't know. Okay, so autonomous learning is the ability for the learner to take charge of their own learning, take responsibility concerning all aspects of their learning. And this is from Holick in 1981. Basically, the learner has to not only learn in the classroom, but also be in charge of their own learning and not just listen to what the teacher says, but also decide and take responsibility over their own learning. And yeah, I became interested in this topic because a lot of students that I had, it just seems like they're going through the motions, not really taking charge of their own learning, not really, they're just doing a lot of English learning for their own class, for their required classes, I think. So that's why I felt like I needed to give students a lot more chances and a lot more opportunities to learn English, especially with their own volition. And so one thing that it's kind of a popular thing in some pop culture articles have it these days, but they talk about language learning proficiency according to the US Foreign Service Program. And according to the US Foreign Service Program, which is the program that trains diplomats and prepares people for learning languages that they may need for government jobs, you need about 600 classroom hours to reach professional proficiency in a language that's similar to English. So for example, Italian, French, or Spanish, you might need 600 classroom hours to reach professional proficiency. I would guess probably a lot more, but that's the US Foreign Service Program's recommendation. And they also say that in order to learn Chinese, Arabic, or Japanese, so these are languages which are much more distant to English, you probably need about 2,200 classroom hours to reach professional proficiency. And there's other opinions on this. Personally, I think it's you probably need more. But for example, Inagaki claims that Japanese learners of English need about 2,500 hours to reach proficiency, and at least double that to use native-like vocabulary. But most Japanese students probably receive somewhere around 1,000 hours. So now I'll go a little bit into motivation. So most Japanese students get maybe 600 or 700 hours of classroom instruction by the time they reach university. And non-English majors usually require 90 additional hours in their freshman year. So almost every university in the freshman year they require students to study 90 hours of English. So either speaking and this, so that's including speaking and listening and reading and writing. So altogether, it's maybe 800 hours. But yeah, it's pretty far cry from the 2,200 hours that the U.S. Foreign Service recommends, or that Inagaki recommends. Also, another thing is that lessons tend to focus on grammar and difficult, long reading passages, a lot of tests. All of these are really common in the Japanese education system. So it means that a lot of time and energy is devoted to a subject that students might not feel that much motivation for, especially intrinsic motivation. A lot of times, maybe certain students might be motivated to get a certain TOEIC score, but they might not feel intrinsic motivation to study English, or they might feel dissatisfaction or low engagement towards English. So another article that I found, or a couple of sources, Mihara and also Arai, they found that many English learners started to act in maladaptive ways. So for example, sleeping in class, dropping out of class, ignoring the teacher, or just refusing to study. So these are all, I think, common things that I've experienced in my classrooms. I hope that you don't experience these things with your students, but my guess is most teachers will face problems with students sleeping in class, or dropping out of class, or refusing to study. So there's a lot of motivational problems there. And in Mihara's study, she found that 91.3% of Japanese students admitted to sleeping in class at some point. So yeah, it's a pretty large percentage of students have experienced sleeping in class. And so a growing body of research suggests that students respond well to MAL, and in particular games, in order to learn EFL. There's a lot, if you type in MAL into Google Scholar, there's a lot of new research coming out, and a lot of it focuses on how to use games effectively, or how to use MAL effectively in classes. And I think one reason is that mobile devices are just everywhere now. So students can engage in learning, or engage in autonomous learning at any time. And MAL can also lead to increases in motivation. So a lot of studies find that MAL helps students feel more motivated to study English. And another reason why MAL could be important is it can increase the number of hours that students study. So as you can see from the previous slides, a lot of students lack the necessary study time to become proficient in English. So hopefully by using MAL, or by playing games, that they can increase the number of hours that they study English. So I came up with 2 research questions on this topic. The first question is, what attitudes did Japanese non-English major first-year students have towards MAL applications? So did they like MAL, or did they enjoy the games that we played? And then once introduced to certain applications and given class time to work with them, did students actually use the application for learning outside of the classroom? So this is the more important research question that I had. I was interested to see, if I introduce certain games to students, will they be interested in studying it on their own? So I'm going to talk about the methods next. I'll talk about participants, treatment, and the game list that I made. So who are the participants? There were 189 students from 9 classes. These are all intact classes that I was teaching last year. And all of them were in the required freshman English class. And they were from 2 women's universities. 72 students said that they were human informatics majors. So human informatics is concerning, it's something to do with computer programming and data, but I'm not quite sure exactly what their major is. And then there were 46 who were business majors, 40 were home economics majors, and 30 were comparative cultures majors, and one student was a literature major. I'm not quite sure if she meant English literature or Japanese literature. It just said literature. And I also surveyed their approximate English level. So I asked first for TOEIC information. And as you can see, most students I was teaching did not have TOEIC, did not take a TOEIC test before. They have no TOEIC score, or they said they forgot. And then 15 students said that they had between 225 and 545 TOEIC. And according to the TOEIC website, this means that they would be classified as A2 learners. And 7 students said that they had between 550 and 870 TOEIC. So these would be classified as B1 learners according to CEFR. And 785 to 940 TOEIC, we had one student who was around this level. And then I also asked for ACAN information or any other tests. And I was surprised to see that a lot more students had taken the ACAN. We had one student who was ACAN 5. So that's, according to the ACAN website, that would be an A1 level student. And we had 19 students who were ACAN 3, which is also A1 level. And then we had June NICU, so pre-2 ACAN was about 62 students. And ACAN 2, we had 70 students. And ACAN pre-1, we had 4 students. So the ACAN pre-2 and ACAN 2 are about A1 to A2 or A2 to B1. They don't specify exactly, but within this range. And yeah, this is the chart that the ACAN uses on their website. And basically, it shows how they compare the ACAN to the CEFR levels. I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I found it to be relatively accurate with my students. I felt that most of my students were in the A2 to B1 range and probably more A2 range. And that's what most of the students gave as their test scores. And I also wanted to measure the students' motivation. So one of the questions in the survey was about in-class motivation. So how motivated are the students to study English in class? And as you can see, it's not too hopeful, but it's okay. But about 50 or 60% of students said that they had little motivation or no motivation to study English. But fortunately, about 40% of students had motivation or were very motivated to study English in the class. And outside of the class, as you can see, it's a lot bleaker story, but about 75% of students said they had no motivation or little motivation to study outside of class, but 25% were motivated or very motivated to study English outside of the class. And now I'm going to talk about the treatment process. So first of all, I compiled a list of 20 applications for students to use, and I put it on a Google site for students to download. And then I used a rough and subjective star system. So I chose these 20 games and I put them on the Google site, and then I put stars beside the games based on how good I thought they were. So how useful I thought they are, how enjoyable, and how authentic the games seem to be. It's just my subjective opinion, and I don't know. I don't have any data to prove that these applications are better than others, but I decided to tell the students that they are. And then I introduced 3 applications in the class over 3 consecutive classes. And these 3 games were Would You Rather, Akinator, and Lingo Clip, also known as lyricstraining.com. And the final 20 minutes of each class were used for students to download or play the applications in pairs. And the teacher also encouraged students to play outside of the class. So basically, I made this list of applications. I put it on the Google site. And this is a Google site that we used in every class to help facilitate the learning. And the students were very used to using the Google site, so they were familiar with it and they could find the games easily. And then I spent the last 30 minutes of 3 classes teaching them how to play the games for 10 minutes, and then I gave them 20 minutes of class time for them to experiment with the games by themselves. And students were surveyed about the experience in the subsequent week. So the first 3 weeks, I introduced games, they played them, and then the last week, I gave the survey. And this is an example of the website that I was using. I'm not the best with web design, but I just made it like this. So the students could see some information about the games and then they could download from these links. I wish I was a little bit better at web design, but unfortunately I'm not. And I'd like to demonstrate a game for a second. So if you can bear with me for a second, I'm going to introduce to you lyricstraining.com, and I hope that you can hear it. I believe that you should be able to hear this. Yeah, it says share sound. So, a lot of students are into Disney music, so I would choose the beginner level. And there's 2 modes, write mode or choice mode. And for beginner level students, I recommend choice mode because it's quite difficult. And because of predictive text, a lot of students are really bad at spelling now. But so I used to do write mode, but because the spelling and my students' level is lower than before, I choose choice mode now. And I'll just try it out. And this is Part of Your World, a Disney song. So this is just a demonstration of this application. And if you have a chance, I hope you can use this in your classrooms as well. And now we're going to talk about the results. Let me just go back to the slideshow. And I'm going to turn it over to Yukiko, and she's going to talk about the results.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And I will continue with the results. So just very quickly, thank you very much for the opportunity to give a presentation today. So I attended some JELD meetings a long time ago, and I'm very glad that I was able to work with Chris and then write the paper with him. And yeah, meet lots of, coworkers that are here today. Okay, thank you. So I will go on to the results. Briefly, I will talk about the games played. Is my sound okay? Okay, good. I will talk about the games played, go on to the attitude towards games played, and the percentage of students who played the games outside of the classroom, and the comments from the students. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so there were 20 games, And 3 games were introduced in class. So Akinator, Lingo Clip, and Duolingo. Would You Rather. Those 3 games were introduced in class. And the students were encouraged to use the game that they preferred outside of class as well. And the results are here. The top 7 are listed in order. And there are 6 others. So Akinator was the top one. And one very big reason is because the students were already familiar with the game because it exists in Japanese. So they were familiar with that. And they just transitioned into using the game using English. And Lingo Clip was very popular too. And I think this also relates to the real life application because even if students don't really feel a need to learn English to speak using it outside class, they're exposed to English a lot in the media. Many songs are in English, so it actually is real life application. And they also love Disney, as Chris mentioned. So there is a kind of intrinsic motivation there. And I think Duolingo is also a very one of the top rated language learning apps. And yes, so I'll go into the comments later about that, but it's really easy to use. Okay, so next slide, please. So attitude towards the games. So here we are going to talk about attitudes over 2 slides. So first, there were 3 positive things. So many students enjoy playing the games. So a big majority. If you look at the agree, 108, and strongly agree, 70. And a quick reminder, the total number of students was 189. It's a really big percentage, right? Only 11 people disagreed. It is easy to use, so that's a very important thing. 105 agreed and 65 strongly agreed. So again, here, it's really huge in terms of future applications of MAL in or outside class. And the games helped me learn new vocabulary. So here again, agree 134 and strongly agree 37. And 18 people disagreed. So there were some negative things. So difficulty, the game was difficult, or the English words and sentences were difficult. So there were 50 people who agreed, 4 people who strongly agreed. So 54 out of 189 students. So the rest didn't think so, right? So disagree 93 and strongly disagree 42. And the English words and sentences were difficult. 37 students agreed. But in this case, I think that since it's just the beginning of using the games, introducing the games 3 times for 30 minutes each in class is not really conclusive. So if it's possible to scaffold, structure the curriculum, and also in interaction that was part of the treatment, the students were able to pair up or work in groups of 3. So there was a certain amount of peer scaffolding, ZPD that took place. So that's also very good to encourage. So as I mentioned before, the teacher can adjust the level by choosing the content of games. Yes. Next slide, please. Attitude towards the game, slide 2. So I think the games are useful for improving my English. Agree, it's a huge majority, and strongly agree. The mean score is very high. And I would like to play more games in English language classes. So again, a huge majority agree and strongly agree. And I would like to play more games in other classes. So 109 agree and 54 strongly agree. So we are both very interested in CLIO. So English is not necessarily, well, it's not necessary to say that English is the main objective, right? So learn by doing, and we can learn English by not focusing on it and focusing on other things that are more interesting. So I think that's also a good thing to do. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, playing outside the classroom. So, do you remember what we talked about in slides 10 and 11? So Chris talked about the in-class motivation, out-of-class motivation. And we saw that in-class motivation was maybe like 40%. And out-of-class motivation was only about 25%. But if we look at the percentage of students who played the games outside of class, we see that there's a total of almost 58%. So that's a huge difference if you consider the fact that before playing games, the motivation level was only 25% for study outside of class. So, thank you. And next slide, some comments from the students. They were positive. So I had been listening to music without understanding the lyrics until I played the game. After playing this game, I learned some of the words. So this goes back to the student probably who heard many songs in English, but never really understood. And with this game, the student was able to finally understand better. It's really fulfilling the real life application. Maybe intrinsic motivation was increased. Next, I learned new vocabulary for enemies and weapons. I'm not quite sure how useful this is for real life, but it's already, good vocabulary learned. And there were some words that I could not understand, but we were able to progress thanks to talking with and learning from my partner. So this interaction, peer scaffolding, SEPD, these are very useful for learning English. Yes. Thank you. Next slide, please. And some comments from the students that were negative. The game Walking Dead was too fast-paced to understand. So many of these games are for native speakers. So it's a kind of to be expected that students who are learning English, right, that level is mostly A2 to B1. So it's normal that they encounter some difficulties when playing games. So I think that can be adjusted by looking at games more closely and choosing the appropriate content. So next, I accidentally pressed the wrong place and I was afraid I was going to be charged money. And next comment, Duolingo asked me to register, so I stopped playing. So these actually kind of show that maybe there might be another way to play the game where the teacher can create a kind of class inside the game or choose a few things so that the students can feel free to register without incurring any fees. So it's also a good chance to look more deeply into using the games in class or outside class too, but maybe with some kind of teacher support. Thank you very much. So I will turn it over to Chris, who will remind you of important things. Maybe I'll just read the research question then. So number 1, quick reminder, what attitudes did Japanese non-English major first-year students have towards small applications? And number 2, once introduced to the applications and given class time to work with them, did the students actually use the applications for language learning outside of the classroom?
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much, Yukiko. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the discussion, and these were the research questions that we were talking about. Let me move this a little bit. So yeah, most students were somewhat motivated to study in the class, but had little motivation to study outside of the class. So as we mentioned, some students, they felt some motivation to study in the class, but it was pretty mixed. But most students didn't have much motivation to study outside of the class. And most students were in the CEFR A2 to B1 range. Most students found the games to be enjoyable. So as we saw in the data, most students said that they agreed or strongly agreed that the games were fun to play. And most students wanted to play more games in English classes as well as other subjects. So most students said yeah, they wanted to play the games again or play other games in English classes or other classes. And for me, the most important question, the second question, did students actually engage in playing these games? And over half of the students engaged in playing the games outside of the class, but most of them only for 0 to 1 hour. So I probably should have done another option like less than 30 minutes, but I chose the option 0 to 1 hour, and I was pleased to see that over half the students actually did play the games for at least 0 to 1 hours. And but one other point that I should bring up is that Short et al. They caution that users of Duolingo experience diminished motivation over time and a lack of real-world usage. So in Short's study, they had a class of students. I think they were a little bit higher level students, but they were using Duolingo for, I think, for the whole semester or for quite a long time. But the students started to feel less motivation over time, and they started to feel like it wasn't practical in their real world usage. So he cautioned that the motivation could go down if you keep playing the same games or spend a long time playing these games. And in conclusion, so just 18 students used the application for more than 1 hour outside of class. So out of the 189 students, 18 students used it for more than 1 hour of class. So, I mean, it's something, it's not nothing. Like I used 1.5 hours of classroom time, and I generated 18 students who decided to use their own language learning autonomously for more than 1 hour outside of class. So that's a step in the right direction, I think. And more research is needed in modeling and scaffolding, providing incentives and integrating MAL in order to make students more autonomous learners. So according to Botero and Kistier, they say that we need a lot more modeling, we need scaffolding, we need to provide incentives, and we need to think of better ways to integrate MAL in order to make students more autonomous and have more motivation to study on their own. Okay, and that is the end of the presentation. So thank you.